to Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production, all the way to release and reception. Today we have a guest for this wonderful, it's the first viewing for him. Ian, why don't you introduce yourself and where you're from and your podcast? Why don't you give yourself a little plug here?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm Ian Mungal. I have a podcast. I do it with my brother. It's called Siblings. It's basically, we have fun talking about movies we love right now. And we also do a top 5 draft, which is kind of relevant to the film we're talking about.
Yeah, I saw that on the your Twitter and I was like, oh, this is perfect. And this is the first time you've seen High Fidelity?
It is. It's one of those movies that came out at a weird time, I guess. I mean, year 2000, I'm 11 years old, and this is a rated R film. And while my parents did make questionable decisions on what they allowed us to watch, this was not one that I came across. So
we were definitely a little bit older when this came out. We were about, 18 years old, 17? Around that.
Yeah.
And Chris, this is your choice this week because you're choosing the old films that we're doing. Why did you choose High Fidelity?
Well, to be honest, I was doing the search like I usually do. What's new to streaming? So High Fidelity was on Hulu for quite a while. It's making the switch over this month as of yesterday, November 1st, to be exclusive to HBO Max. And I don't know, I was thinking that I like picking movies where it's like, a big, nice round number anniversary. And this is the 20th anniversary this year of High Fidelity. But also it was one of those movies that stood out like a sore thumb to me when asking this question, like we kind of asked ourselves with the Species episode recently, of, how we viewed films as, preteens and teenagers, especially as male preteens and teenagers around that time, late 90s, early 2000s versus today. And I felt like it needed a reckoning. It needed a 2020 look.
This is a big one. And before we dive into the film, I have to say that I reread this book on a whim. It was one of my favorite books back when I was a teenager. Probably when I was like 19. I decided, and I have not read a novel in forever. Despite like having my master's in literature, I just stopped reading novels for like a decade. And then for some reason, this was the novel that I chose to start reading again. And it was quite the experience. It is. Yeah. Well, I think we'll dive into the film, what it's all about. Well, what is it all about, Chris? Give us kind of the synopsis of this film.
Yeah.
If someone hasn't seen it.
Well, here's the thing is, I mean, even in my heyday, watching this movie over and over again on my Blockbuster previously viewed VHS as a freshman in college, it was very much that kind of movie where it's like, I don't really know what it's about, other than it's the story of a guy who owns a record store and his trials and tribulations in the area of love. And it feels like so amorphous, especially now rewatching it and feeling like I have a better grasp on like what a film's script should be to feel like cohesive and tangible. And now it still comes across that way. So the plot, just generally speaking, if you Google the synopsis, it says Rob Gordon is the owner of a failing record store in Chicago where he sells music the old-fashioned way, on vinyl. That's hilarious in 2020, by the way. Although they have an encyclopedic knowledge of pop music and are consumed by the music scene, it's of no help to Rob, whose needle skips the love groove when his longtime girlfriend Laura walks out on him. As he examines his failed attempts at romance and happiness, the process finds him being dragged, kicking and screaming into adulthood. So is this, I think that's my opening question to both of you. Is this the genesis of the man-child genre that was popularized by Judd Apatow well into the 2000s?
Oh my God, that's such a heavy question.
Maybe I'm not.
It's possible. I mean, it's there's something in the release notes that I have. I forget what it is. It's down there somewhere. But talking about sort of why this film is still viewed as like important by a lot of people. And I think there is something there where I think this is resolutely a Generation X film. It's a film about people in their mid-30s during this time period. And when did the book come out? Was it like
95?
Okay, so that makes perfect sense. So born in, essentially the main character is 35 years old, was born in 1960, like right in that Gen X sort of time span. And I think, yeah, there definitely is a lot of parallels between High Fidelity and John Cusack's character in something like you'd see in like Knocked Up, even like when was that, 7 years later essentially, or a lot of that stuff in the mid 2000s, Wedding Crashers maybe a little bit. All the Judd Apatow stuff is essentially an example of that, where yeah, people are in their 30s and they still act like they're little like teenagers emotionally perhaps. But yeah, I mean, I think there is I think we're going to kind of beat up the film a bit. I get that feeling on this episode. I have a lot to say about that, but I do think it is kind of like an important film for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because it does, and I remember this when I read the book for the first time, as an 18-year-old music nerd, used to hang out at Exclusive Company, which is like an independent record store where me and Chris grew up. It was, I think, the first time where I had heard that voice of this obsessive music nerd who was, extremely narcissistic. Oh, they don't realize that at the time, right? Kind of just, I don't know, his perspective of the world. I had never come across this before. Like that resolute, nerdy music snob who's kind of a nerd and on the out, feels like he's always on the outside. I feel like there is something there, like a special voice. I don't know, Ian, did you pick that up? Because this is the first time you've seen it. Did this character seem to you like somebody that you've met before, or did you feel like there's an overlap with stuff in your life, or did it feel really foreign?
Well, as a former musician, I played in bands and stuff. I definitely have met this type of person, and that's as soon as they introduce you to the three guys that work at the record shop, I'm immediately go like, these people are real. I mean, they're definitely they're caricatures of real people, at least. And I mean, I've worked at a very niche shop. It's like a nerd gaming shop sort of thing, like Magic the Gathering and all that stuff. And there are very, very similar types of people that just come in and quotation marks work there. And not really work there. And so these are definitely real types of people that are obsessive about music. And I definitely have had some friends that are obsessive about music, maybe not to this extent where they have shelves on shelves of vinyl in their house,
which back in 2000 was weird. That would be a weird thing. Like now it's, I have vinyl too, but like,
yeah, I have vinyl as well. So,
but the thing is, I didn't start collecting vinyl until like probably the mid 2000s, and like having a vinyl shop in the mid 90s and early 2000s, it's definitely that's niche, right? Like that's kind of its own thing. All right, Chris, who made this movie? Who is this? What is this all about?
Yeah, this is where it kind of falls apart for me, honestly, because everything you guys are saying, like the conception, like it's clear why I was drawn to it, because it was the only movie like that, at least that was widely available at the time. And yet it's so strange to really look at it with a clearer, wiser eye 20 years later and see, okay, so it's produced by Working Title Films in conjunction with Touchstone Pictures. So like essentially it's a Disney-fied version of the indie record store geek's life, right?
Okay.
So Stephen Frears directed it, and the team of Steve Pink, John Cusack, and Vincent or what's his name, Victor De Vincentes,
something like that.
Yeah, so these three guys had been working together for a number of years at this point. They grew up, they went to high school together, they ended up finally making Grosse Pointe Blank together in 97, and then somehow the producers Joe Roth and Tim Bevins get them hooked up with Frears, who had basically already planned to adapt it, Frears being British along with Hornby, with a script by Steve Rosenberg, the guy who wrote Con Air, Disturbing Behavior, and had a script that sold for a lot of money just the year before, Gone in 60 Seconds. And so it seemed like they were very much aiming for like this across the pond universal hit. But I think there was this strange, in my opinion anyways, misstep in then ultimately choosing to collaborate with the New Crime Productions guys that was Cusack and his basically two best friends, because then you get this weird muddled voice of like the stately Frears. Like there's a great anecdote of him basically as a 50-something-year-old director lamenting about being too old to direct this movie. And he had made The Grifters, which was Oscar nominated, and then had two really big bombs in the 90s with the Dustin Hoffman sappy drama Hero and the Frankenstein reimagining Mary Riley. And he was kind of on the downslope. And so then it's one of those like Hollywood cocktails of strange mix-up, and Rosenberg's script, which he had adapted to be set in Boston rather than Chicago, was essentially ignored, and Cusack and his two buds rewrote it from scratch, and it just feels like it was a really messy process. That's ultimately what happened, but I'm curious, did you guys feel that while you were watching it? Did it feel messy?
Well, personally, it does feel messy, and like I haven't read the book, and I guess y'all have, but it's this sort of fourth wall breaking self-narration that doesn't lend itself particularly well to film in the first place because it seems lazy, in my opinion. And I think y'all have kind of talked about that in when y'all talked about The Devil All the Time, but that's it just feels like they could have written it with more show don't tell sort of things in mind. Like I would rather him have these conversations, with the women in his life instead of actually talking up to me, the audience. And I is the book like that as well?
Yeah, the book's it's constantly breaking the fourth wall, and it's funny that you bring that up because I kind of like the way they do it in the film because it is, I don't know, there's not a lot of ways you can film that. I was watching an interview with the author Nick Hornby about a year after the movie came out. He was on Conan O'Brien, and one of the things he said explicitly was that like this was a terrible idea to try and make this movie because it's like an unfilmable book. It'd be like filming like Sound and the Fury, and not that similar levels of literature, but it's a very difficult narrative that works well. And I will say, when I reread the book, that part of it works incredibly well because it brings you right into that character's perspective immediately. But in a film, it plays very, and one of the things that I think in terms of its messiness, it does, I think the fourth wall breaking, to me, it does it pretty well, but then it also tries to kind of push in this more traditional narrative instead of going like full postmodern and just like throwing the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks is almost like an experimental kind of film, which they did not do, obviously. They tried to kind of be in no man's land where narratively they wanted it to be very traditional with these traditional beats, but kind of presented in a non-traditional way. And I think that to me is where a lot of the becomes very muddled and staticky. It's like, what are you really trying to say here? It kind of oscillates back and forth. I do have to point out that the transition of this film, or translation, I should say, of this film from England to Chicago is a really big deal. And I think there's a lot of cultural stuff in the book that really, if you're like really into British music and stuff, it rings really true and you connect with it. There's some of that in the movie and it sort of works, but I think that cultural translation that happens is also pretty problematic, especially when it comes to relationships. Because you think that men and women are somewhat similar throughout the world. Oh, it's the UK, the United States. How different can it be? Well, it's super different. And like doing what he's doing at his age as a British man, it just feels very different than an American doing it. So I think we have to I wanted to point that out, that like that translation, I think, is also where this film, it's another barrier to success. There's a lot of barriers here. And so as much as like we kind of are going to shit on the film a bit, I feel like we already are, right? There's a lot here that was difficult. The book was almost very hard to film. They decided to move it across to a completely different culture, essentially. And so I think those are things we kind of want to point out as sort of like, this wasn't the easiest thing in the world to pull off. I also want to note that Steve Rosenberg the two other writers, Pink and whatever his name is, I can't figure his name. They hate Rosenberg because they think Rosenberg stole credit for it. Essentially,
Yes.
it's like the big thing.
He basically used like a WGA loophole to get a credit, right?
Yikes.
Yeah. But yeah, so okay, like with the book and stuff like that, like
so
go ahead, yeah.
So the as we're while we're on the subject of translation from book to screen, have you guys watched the Hulu series with Zoe Kravitz?
You know, I have. Yeah,
Yes.
I haven't finished it, but I've watched probably the first half, and I kind of love it.
So that was my day yesterday. I was like, well, I'm gonna do this movie about a book. I'm gonna see both, iterations of it.
Did you like it?
I loved it way more than I liked this movie for sure. And I think I'll talk about it later, but yeah, I just wanted to see if you guys had watched that as well.
Yeah, it's the series is interesting. It's a lot, obviously a totally different medium doing a limited series than a film. But the film is just like they got to stuff in so much stuff so quickly.
Right.
Every scene, they cut a lot of scenes. There's a lot of great deleted scenes from High Fidelity that you can catch on YouTube. And so you do miss a lot. But that's whenever you're trying to translate a novel to a film, does that often end in success? I don't know, Chris, what do you think?
I did want to mention that, like, especially with the and they knew that they were taking a gamble, right, with that breaking the fourth wall thing, because basically the multiple previous drafts of the script was going to just simply be voiceover, which is its own problem, like we mentioned on the Devil All the Time episode that you referenced, Ian, and I'm sure that that's been talked to death. And so they at least knew they wanted to do something different. And for that, like, warts and all, like John Cusack, I have a lot of mixed feelings on the guy, but one of the things that he does well is in this movie especially, because he kind of sleptwalked through a lot of other movies both before and after this one.
His whole career.
Yeah.
Harsh.
But I do feel like he's at least trying. I can tell that he cares here and that he's really giving it all, just like Jack Black is.
I don't know. Disagree.
No?
I think he's completely.
You think he's phoning it in?
I think no, maybe not phoning it in, but I don't like his performance. I don't like him as a character. And then I looked through his IMDb credits, and I'm like, I don't particularly like him at all.
Yeah, no, it's totally fair. I think it was more just, I think because of the notion of the part that got through to me is that he clearly is the kind of guy that in his own personal life, and it remains true today, that he's never settled down. He's never really been the kind of person to marry, to be monogamous. And so it seems like that part of like the psychic break in his ability to really both be a good person, and that's the other part that's tricky with the movie, is that you really don't like Rob, unlike Zoe Kravitz's performance in the series.
You do like her.
You do like her, right? Yeah. And that comes, I think, to the zenith of the problem, which is that, or nadir, if you want, of this absolute breakdown in the overarching question of, does the script, and maybe you could also argue John Cusack's performance, did they know that he's unlikable? Do they care that he's unlikable? Do they want him to be unlikable?
It's funny you say that, because I watched another video essay on YouTube. This is what I do with my time, obviously, and I read the comments. And somebody was like, so it was breaking the fourth wall was the essay thing, video essay, and it was not very well done, but whatever. I'm not gonna trash the person who did it. Underneath the comments, somebody was sort of like, there was an argument going on with this exact question, and I actually had a conversation with a friend about this. Is this movie ironic in the sense that, like, it's making Rob to be this terrible person, and like that's the irony of it? It's like criticizing the man child and the emotionally maladapted male. Is that how it's happening? Is there a level of irony? I would say the answer is absolutely, I would say no.
Right.
That like they're presenting it as sort of like a valid way to live your life, not like it's promoting it, but like this is how some men are, this is what men sometimes do. I I did not get any ironic detachment or distance with this movie at all, that it was criticizing the main character. I don't know. Am I wrong in saying that? Is there some level of irony here that I'm missing?
I think, I mean, it's pretty on the nose, right? I mean, guys do this. I mean, I've been in numerous, I mean, this movie spoke to me. And I mean, when you guys asked me to be on this podcast, I was like, okay, let me look, you know, I know of the movie. Let me read about it. And I was like, oh, this speaks to me, since I've been through many breakups and all that. And so I just don't think he's the one for this, I guess.
Like
I don't
John
know.
Cusack as like an actor, or like
I don't know what it was exactly, the character. I'm like, yeah, you can, I've self-sabotaged relationships, sure, and that's what the movie's about, him self-sabotaging all of his relationships
over and over again,
and blaming it on the women. And I mean, I've been there personally, and I mean, so I definitely, it speaks to me on some level, that the story itself. And I just think that it's not ironic, it's not coy or cute or charming in any sort of way. So and maybe that's just John Cusack's performance that just rubbed me the wrong way.
Sure.
It's almost like he inhabits the character too well. And it just sort of, he's too comfortable in it, and it almost seems too authentic. Like I kind of what was Chris was saying was before about him and his personal life, that always comes across in the characters that you play. It does kind of feel like he is Rob on some level, and I think that hurt. I don't know, that maybe it hurts the film. It sends a message that's sort of like, this is how men can act. This is what happens. And by the end, he comes around a little bit and obviously finds out, oh, this is important. But I actually had a conversation with a friend about that part of the movie, and she essentially said that, like, oh, he does the bare minimum. Right. He does the absolute bare minimum here to be a decent boyfriend, husband, partner, whatever you want to call it. And like, that's supposed to be the denouement or the resolution of this story. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things. I thought the thing that I think this movie does very well, and I think this goes back to the book and to the production who's involved in the script, is that it starts out incredibly strong. I think the first 20 minutes here are actually really, really good. But once you hit that 20-30 minute mark, it starts to really list, and you can't really tell which way it's going. Was there a way to sort of correct this film, or is it kind of like doomed from the start? That's one of the questions we always have about movies that kind of don't end up where we think they should. All right. Was this thing doomed?
It's 2 hours long. It's 2 hours of breakup stories, which is, I mean, yeah, you can make a television show, but 2 hours, if you're telling 5 breakup stories, like, doesn't give you enough time to really soak in these relationships to even care about them.
Yeah. Right.
So doomed from the start, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I mean, going back to something you said earlier, Ian, about, the female characters' perspectives, I think that's also true for the male characters' perspectives of the supporting cast, is that they're trying to pull off this tricky feat of it being an ensemble movie, but us constantly coming back to what's going on in John Cusack's head. And then on top of that, you've got the issue of what Dan was saying, where he basically has like a blip on a radar version of character development by the end of the movie. And so it feels lifeless. It feels like there's no depth or breadth in it. And it's just basically a lot of talking with like a couple good zingers to keep you entertained, and Jack Black's volume.
Just Jack Black being Jack Black.
Exactly.
But what do we think about, we got to talk about Jack Black a little bit in this. I think that, and I got to find the quote where he basically talks about like how he what did he say? The only time I went all the fucking way is when he sort of talks about this movie. And he talks about how people come up to him a lot and say, oh man, this is like the best performance ever. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. I think that Jack Black is pretty wonderful in this movie. Is he annoying? Yeah, but that's kind of who he is. And is he playing a character that's really kind of close to his actual personality? Yeah. But that ends up making for good acting usually. And I don't know, I think to me, without Jack Black in this movie, it would be pretty might be unwatchable. It might be kind of like Drek if Jack Black is not there to sort of, I don't know, lighten the mood a bit or just make it a more frivolous, if that makes sense. I don't know. What do you guys think about Jack Black in this?
Okay,
I mean,
so I
you
think.
go ahead first. Ian.
Sorry. Being my first watch through, I mean, from familiar with Jack Black. This is one of his like really breakout roles where they let him be himself, right? So when I see it, I'm just going, okay, it's just Jack Black.
Sure.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah,
and
it's
I think
like
for
this caricature.
Yeah,
for us, it was definitely a different story, especially being that, unbridled emotion of a 17, 18-year-old watching this movie. And I think that one thing I noticed watching it back, there are some quiet character moments. I can't think of a single one with Rob actually, but these small moments in the movie that still resonate with me, and I remember resonating with me when I was first obsessed with the film. And the two that come to mind are the time where the guy comes in to ask Jack Black about being in a band with him. Where Black is as restrained as he perhaps has ever been on film. And then the other one being when we find out that Dick, Todd Luiso's character, by the way, what happened to this guy? I love him.
He's good. He's good.
But when his character has that sweet interaction with the girl about the Green Day song, and it's like one of the only examples, one of the things that like I kept cringing at watching it again in 2020 is every other interaction that Black's character or Cusack's character has with a woman about music, except for this one, where it actually feels like sweet and authentic, and there's, it's flirty, but it's also not like mansplaining. And
that brings up like a huge
right. So that is what I'm curious to hear your guys' take on, because ultimately it's a movie about breakups, but it's also obviously about music. And I mean, does Hornby's kind of thesis come through here? That, I mean, he's kind of said this in numerous interviews, but I don't know if Cusack and his buddies that wrote the script 1,000 times really got to the heart of it, of these guys that are obsessed with an art form that is all about like emotional truth and honesty, and yet are completely unable to be emotionally truthful and honest with themselves or their partners.
That's I mean, a huge part of this whole thing, and I find this to be very true growing up as like a music nerd, is that like especially as a dude, where emotions are not exactly your first language, and listening to music and talking about music, especially with other guys, is a way to talk about emotional stuff. And like being obsessed with, like, I don't know, who were you obsessed with in high school? I can't remember. What's a band, like Jimmy Eat World or something? That's more
Jimmy
college.
Eat World or Pavement. Yeah.
Jimmy Eat World, Pavement. Let's say Jimmy Eat World, which is, essentially
I'm in a whole different world, I guess.
Yeah. Give us a couple names, Ian.
Yeah, give us a couple. Where like
Alexis on Fire.
Oh yeah, Alexis on Fire.
Totally. Under Oath.
Canada. Yeah, Under Oath. I love Under Oath. Like that's a way to talk about things you can't face, or is not maybe socially acceptable in your in-group to talk about. You can talk about the new Jimmy Eat World song or talk about the new Under Oath, and it's a way to connect with people on an emotional level that feels comfortable. But where this movie I think falls short is that it really gets the snob part of music nerds right, because a lot of people who are super into vinyl and stuff like that, I think people are like super into jazz or something, they have like this sort of like downward glance at other people because it's an in-group out-group thing. That's what's happening. I'm in the in-group, I know these things, you don't, so get away because I want to be safe, right? He gets that right, and the movie gets that right. But what he doesn't really get is like the feeling of going to a show with people, in that sort of community that develops around a band or an album or a song. He doesn't seem to connect. In the movie, it doesn't happen almost at all. There's that one scene we talk about the Green Day thing, but that's an integral part of being a lover of music, is that community connection that you get And I think that's mostly missing from the movie.
I think there's that one scene where he's like, I'm about to sell five
Oh,
five
God,
copies
Oh,
of
Beta
this.
Band EP, 3
Yeah.
EPs, yeah.
And I'm like,
Uh,
yeah, it's so surface level, but there is nothing quite like sharing something you love with somebody else, especially music, especially a song, especially an album or a movie. But
I mean, yeah, it's euphoric, I found, especially when you're younger. It's almost like you feel like you're alone, and then you find other people that are into the same art that you're into, and it's a really revelatory experience, I find.
Yeah, almost all the characters in this are super abrasive with their sharing of their love for music.
Well, I'm curious now that you guys bring this up, and I haven't watched it in a number of years, but we're talking about the year 2000 when High Fidelity came out, which was also the year of another music obsession movie, Almost Famous. Does that movie hold up? Does that continue this? Does this do a better job at kind of showing the shared connection of musical obsession?
I haven't seen that movie in 15 years.
Yeah, same.
Well, I think Almost Famous I probably watched like 5 years ago, probably. It used to be like one of my favorite films. I think what Almost Famous gets right is the mass communal experience of music. Like, not partly the celebrity, but sort of the magic or majesty of being in a rock band, and that sort of mythology that surrounds rock in a band like Led Zeppelin. Like, there's something very powerful and mysterious about that. I think Almost Famous gets that right, kind of looking deeper into that. Whereas High Fidelity is more about, if that's about the mass, it's about the smaller group of the individual and their obsession with music and how they connect with it. I don't know. It just, when I think about music obsessed people, I almost never think about the snobs, because those people aren't really all that important and they're annoying and you don't really want to have them in your life. I always think about sort of the people that are just truly enthusiastic about the same music that I'm into and connecting about it and getting excited about it. To me, that's the meat or core of being a music obsessive,
right?
Is that communal joy in music. I don't know. I mean, do you guys? I feel like one of the biggest problems with this film, to me, and sort of the messaging and the characters, is yes, those people do exist, but like, you kind of get rid of those people. I feel like sometimes in your life when you're sort of like,
we don't want to spend a 2-hour movie with those people.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I remember people like in high school, I won't name names, but I know Chris Polly here can think of one or two that were like this. And it was sort of like, I would talk about, I remember there was this guy, I wanted to name his name, but I can't name his name. He asked me, this is at a lunch deal, he asked me, what are your 5 favorite bands? And I went through each one, and after each one he said they suck. And
yeah, I know exactly.
That's so perfect.
About.
You know who I'm talking about, Chris. Yeah. And so like, that was just sort of like, well, those types of people in music I get rid of. I've excised those people from my life and have wanted nothing to do with them. And that's these people in this movie. I would not be friends with Jack Black or Dick or Rob in this movie, because they kind of suck.
Right.
They're not fun people or interesting people at all. I mean, they might be interesting. They might have good taste. You might like get a record recommendation, but you don't want to hang out with them and have a beer. You know what I mean?
And there's this whole other layer of the movie is, you talk about the downward glance. That's not only happening with the record store workers and everybody else outside or that comes into the record store, but it's also with Rob as the protagonist, and then Dick and Jack Black's character below him, right? And that really like rubbed me the wrong way. You mentioned about how like after that 20-minute mark, essentially after the montage of the top 5 breakups, then we really, start to get to know our protagonist. And that was like, especially on my rewatch yesterday, it was that moment when he like is both insulting the Belle and Sebastian song that Dick has chosen, as well as insulting the mixtape that Jack Black's character has brought in. And it's like, this guy does not like anybody, so why do I want to commit to this time with him, unless the film is going to be wink wink nudge nudge and kind of skewer its protagonist and turn him into somebody that we should hate. But it doesn't. It doesn't at all. Yeah,
it doesn't.
trying to make us
and I think
side with him.
one of the interesting things too, you talk about like when it was released and sort of like talking about maybe the reception of this film in general. In that same Conan O'Brien interview with Nick Hornby, the author, about a year after the film came out, Conan O'Brien's like, "Oh, I love this film. This film was one of the best films I've seen in a long time." And he wasn't kidding. You could tell he was being authentic, that he really loved the movie, and critics love the movie. 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 76 score, which is very high. Top critics 87%, Metacritic's at a 79. Anything close to 80 on Metacritic's fantastic. Audience score of a 90%. That's RT, Rotten Tomato audience score. So you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. Letterboxd was also high, 74 on Letterboxd. But the cinema score when it came out, which would have been the Friday night it came out, that first audience, the 7 p.m. showing, they get pulled. They give it a C+, which is terrible.
Right.
So like looking at these responses, it's a weird. Critics seem to really like the movie, which makes sense, because a lot of art critics and film critics might fall into that Rob category of kind of, being super into an art form, maybe a little bit of an outsider because of that, a little bit of a chip on your shoulder. Okay, I like this character. I like this group of people. But there also is a very strong audience love for this film. And it comes back when people were talking about the oral history and the actors and stuff, about how this is the movie that comes up most often. And when people walk up to them, fans like, "Oh man, I loved you in High Fidelity." Why do you think there is this staying power to the movie after 20 years now, where, we saw it when we were 17, 18, it obviously hit a home run with us. Why are people keep coming back to it, younger people, connecting with this film throughout the years? What do you guys think?
Maybe it's just because they love Jack Black's comedic performance. I'm not sure why they keep coming back to this. I mean, I probably won't watch it ever again.
Yeah, me neither. And I watched it a lot as a teenager. So I think that, nostalgia is strong, right? As we've seen time and time again with Hollywood. But I do think it's interesting that, like, especially something like Letterboxd, where, it is film snobs. I love
totally.
I love the app, but
I love those people. Yeah,
it's tough to kind of look away. I think there's two key quotes that I wanted to share with you guys that kind of show the yin and yang, so to speak, of the staying power of this movie. One from Ebert in the throes of it. Clearly, a critic's critic, but also, always attempting to be a populist, especially I think during this time period, during the waning days of the TV show with Siskel. In its unforced, whimsical, quirky, obsessive way, Ebert writes, High Fidelity is a comedy about real people and real lives. The movie looks like it was easy to make, but it must not have been, because movies this wry and likable hardly ever get made. And I think that really is an interesting Ebert quote, considering how much he was known for both skewering high profile Hollywood comedies, Deuce Bigelow, things along that line, but also how prone he was to kind of looking over in what a lot of other people would see as obvious flaws of a movie, simply because it reflects something resonant with him. And that, I think, is coupled. You could couple that with Amy Tobin's Village Voice review, which stated, "It may seem perverse to fault a movie for being too accurate, but when surface accuracy is coupled with tunnel vision about self and society, the result is a wee bit irritating." And I think it's important here to look at a woman critic's point of view here, because it becomes so clear that the navel gazing that's going on in this movie, both in the script and in the execution, is something that is probably, honestly, a lot easier to overlook as a guy, and especially a guy who himself is a snob, and maybe even especially a guy that's younger. And that brings me up to one question that I meant to bring up earlier that I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on. How old is Rob in this movie? How old is his character?
He's 35 in the book.
In the book, he's 35. Is that what we're kind of gleaning from the film adaptation?
I guess I would say like 30 something,
right?
Or maybe a little bit younger. I don't know. What do you think?
I think he's probably in mid 30s. Yeah, that's what I gathered anyway.
And I think that's kind of ultimately for me anyways, what it gets the heart at, because like I'm in my mid-30s now, and it really horrifies me to see a protagonist act like this in his mid-30s, and we're supposed to, care about him and empathize with him.
That might be a Gen X thing, though. I mean, to me, like the way he's acting, it seems like maybe like if you're a millennial or whatever, I could see someone in like their late 20s acting this way, like 28,
Right.
29.
And that's what I was hoping for.
Yeah, like it kind of feels maybe a little bit like that. Like I definitely was much more of a jerk when I was 27 or whatever.
Same.
But yeah, I think the Gen X element really, there's something there where it does kind of feel like his character is like a paradigm of being a man in that time period. So I don't want to like completely fault it as sort of just being irritating and kind of annoying and a man-child thing, which is all probably true. But there is something about that time period of that generation and the stuff that they were going through and the questioning that they were having about their lives. And about one of the things that sticks out to me here is that he owns a record shop in his mid-30s. That's a pretty awesome thing to do.
Yeah.
Like, I wish that I could quit my corporate, like, whatever I'm doing right now, and do that. Like there's something, and I feel like with the Gen X people, there was that pull towards kind of doing your dream thing. And it was I felt much more black and white back then. Like you were either in the corporate world or you absolutely were not. Whereas now it all mixes up. It's all like a stirring pot. What is selling out now? Does selling out even exist now? When you think about back then, that was a big deal. Like becoming a lawyer or, working for a big, huge corporation. Now it's like people don't even bat an eye at it. Yeah. So I think that element's important too, to sort of think about it in the historical context and generational context, that like there might be a little bit more here than we're suggesting about sort of the importance of his character and what he's doing. But I don't know, Ian, let's wrap this thing up. What are our parting thoughts about High Fidelity? I will start. I'll toss my hat in the ring first. I think that it is, back to what I was saying, kind of an historical document. As a film in and of itself, it's not very good. I think the book is extremely problematic. I think it was a decent attempt to put that onto screen here in a 2-hour movie. Very, very tough job to do. I don't think they were entirely successful across the board. But if you remove the context of where this story is from, and you just view it as a film in and of itself, I think it's not very good. But it is good to sort of view it as like, well, this is kind of what Gen X people were talking about. This is what they were expressing emotionally about their lives back then. And it's also great because of Jack Black, I think. And like outside of that, and some of the musical references are amazing. Like that Beta Band 3 EP thing, like that's a very like pinpoint time in 2000 when that would be cool and interesting.
And like
but outside of that,
later, they opened for Radiohead and sold out tours worldwide.
Yeah, I was there, man. You were there.
Yeah, we
were there. What do you guys think? What are your started closing thoughts on High Fidelity?
Well, I think its movie is way too long for what it is. And I mean, it could be sort of understandable if we were actually invested in any of the relationships that affected him, which I think that's the problem of the movie for me. I mean, I'm extremely fascinated by the concept with, relationships and how they shape people's lives and how they affect people's lives. And I think more time should be spent here instead of all the needless, in my opinion, fourth wall breaks and narration.
Yeah.
And I think the source material itself probably lends itself better to a television series, which we got on Hulu, which they subsequently canceled, even though that I thought it was great. Yeah. And I think it's a decent film. I mean, definitely a fascinating premise, but it's dragging length and characters that, while believable, I seem to like less and less as the film progressed. And like I said earlier, why should we care about this guy? Why should we care about his relationship with Laura when she isn't particularly interesting or likable either? And I still find myself saying that he doesn't deserve her.
Yeah,
And
that's how bad he is.
I get that this is a story about how men purposefully sabotage their relationships because they fantasize about being with other women, and I get it. I've been there, but I don't like Rob. I don't, and in this story, and maybe you're not supposed to. I mean, but honestly, I don't find him charming, and why? I ask myself at the end of the movie, like, why should I care? And I also want to talk about the film's treatment of women is pretty shitty too.
Oh, it's horrific. And that's a whole nother episode. Is there a single, I went through all the relationships. Is there a single relationship where he doesn't feel like he's being like cuckolded?
Oh,
right. Does any relationship end where he doesn't get, the woman doesn't go to another man?
Right.
Or is involved? There, I think there's one. It happens in every single one. And I was like, is this the first incel movie?
Oh, God.
I joke, but I kind of don't.
Don't bring that up at the 45-minute mark, Dan.
I'm sorry I brought it up because
it's good to bring up.
It has to be said that this.
I had all these notes about it. All these notes about him.
Yes.
Sort of every relationship is the woman going to another man. I was like, Hornby, come on, buddy.
Yeah. And if you look at all the creators of this film, they're all men, right?
Exactly. Oh, it's all dudes. It's all dudes. This is definitely a sausage fest. Chris, what do you think? What are your closing thoughts on this?
So, I mean, so as I had the film on, I was honestly not only just like dreading each subsequent minute, but also when we got to the end, I literally had to rewind the ending like monologue like 3 times because I kept asking myself, is his character saying nothing for its final conclusion in this like heart-to-heart look at the camera fourth wall breaking thing? And yeah, like essentially I think that's the biggest takeaway I get is his final words, I'm going to paraphrase, but are essentially like, making a mixtape is hard. It's got lots of rules, but I know how to make her happy. Finally.
It's so good.
It's so like obscenely undercooked and just shapeless, and there's so much that could have been done, and I think that's where a lot of the frustration stems from, is like I hate how much it didn't do, and it chose to replace all that with essentially just, you know, a good soundtrack and horrible people. And and especially with like Laura's character, I mean, she's recovering from the death of her father, and then all of a sudden she's like planning a release show for this new band, and we knew basically nothing about her other than that she's a lawyer and she dresses different than she used to.
And her haircut's awful.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just
no more pink hair for her. Yeah, it is a rocky ride, I think, this film, but it's worth checking out, especially if you're into music and you've never seen it before. Just dive into it and see what you think.
It is a time capsule. I think you're right.
It is absolutely a time capsule. If you were not, of age back then, you kind of want to know what being a music nerd was like in the year 2000. That's what it was like. Okay, Ian, thank you for being a guest, man. You're awesome.
Thank you for having me.
What was you guys got a new episode coming out on Sin Siblings, or you got an old one you want to sort of talk about real quick?
Well, we just did Braveheart, our little deep dive into Braveheart, where we go scene by scene, talk about all that. But new episodes every Friday. We're about to release our top 5 superhero moments in film draft. It's a fun one for sure.
Awesome. So it's coming this Friday. All right, check it out. Sim Siblings.
It's a good
and what are we doing next week? It's my choice. I just picked now. The Wolf of Snow Hollow by Jim Cummings. It's a horror comedy film shot for about $2 million. Just got put out on VOD. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a little bit of a different sort of film than we usually cover here. So I'm excited to do that. Ian, thank you. Chris, thanks. This has been Film Trace. Thank you for listening.